Hello, dear participants. Welcome back to my session on listening skills in language acquisition. In this section, I'm going to talk about importance of listening in language acquisition. It should not be difficult to realize the importance of listening when we consider that it occupies about 45% of the time adult spends in communication. कम नहीं है यार 45%. All of our time in communication, 45% of it is dedicated to listening. This is significantly more than speaking, which accounts for 30%, and reading and writing, which make up 16% and 9% respectively. तो सीधा सीधा मतलब ये है कि 50% लगभग 50% समय हम लिसनिंग को देते हैं और देना चाहिए। लेकिन जब हम बात करते हैं कि जैसे हम लैंग्वेज सीख रहे हैं, सीखने में हमने कितना समय गंवाया है? बिल्कुल भी नहीं। प्रॉपर training of language listening has never been provided to us. Anyways, yet, for all its importance, students and even teachers often fail to give listening the attention it needs. This is all the more remarkable as learners often say that listening is the most challenging of all the skills in English. हमने बच्चों को अक्सर ये कहते हुए सुना है कि सर मैं लिख सकता हूँ, बोल नहीं सकता। अरे भाई तू बोल लेगा एक बार, लेकिन तू सुन नहीं सकता। सुनने की जो आदत हमें होनी चाहिए वो हमें लगाई ही नहीं गई है, या हमने उसके बारे में कभी सोचा ही नहीं। जैसे हमारी सांसें चल रही हैं, हमने कभी उसके बारे में सोचा ही नहीं है। ये कोविड जो आजकल सबको परेशान जिसने कर रखा है, उसने हमें सभी को, पूरी दुनिया को हेल्थ के बारे में अवेयर बना दिया है। सभी लोग फिर से जागने लगे हैं, योगा कर रहे हैं। इम्यूनिटी बूस्टिंग, दैट इज़ द न्यू ट्रेंडिंग वर्ड नाउडेज। अगर आपको ज़िंदा रहना है, बचे रहना है, फिट रहना है, वर्क ऑन योर इम्यूनिटी। और इम्यूनिटी कहाँ से आएगी? कीप ब्रीदिंग, conscious breathing. In the same manner, the importance that breathing has got in our life in terms of fitness and immunity, the equal importance is of listening in our everyday communication. But what we are doing? We are neglecting it very often. Let's not forget that it makes up of about 50% of our everyday communication. तो और ज़्यादा इसके बारे में क्या कहें? चलिए देखते हैं कि इम्पोर्टेंस क्या है और किस तरह से उसे एक्वायर किया जा सकता है। When we speak about language acquisition, it creates confusion in our mind, whether to learn it or whether to acquire it. There are two terms, learning and acquisition. So what is the difference between the two? According to linguists, there is an important distinction between language acquisition and language learning. As you may well have noticed, children, they acquire their mother tongue through interaction with their parents and the environment that surrounds them. Their need to communicate paves the way for the language acquisition to take place. यानी उनकी वो ज़रूरत होती है, उन्हें एक्सप्रेस करना होता है अपने आप को, उन्हें कुछ मांगना होता है, उन्हें कुछ कहना होता है, उन्हें कुछ इमोशंस जाहिर करने होते हैं, उन्हें गुस्सा होना होता है, जो भी करना होता है, ये उनकी ज़रूरत होती है जो उन्हें मजबूर कर देती है उस लैंग्वेज को सीखने में। वो अपने आसपास देखते हैं अपने माँ बाप को, अपने भाई बहन, अपने पड़ोसी, रिश्तेदार, अपने क्लासमेट्स, स्कूल के स्टूडेंट्स, सभी को देखते हैं और ऑब्जर्व करके अपनी लैंग्वेज सीखते हैं। दिस इज़ द वे चिल्ड्रन एक्वायर देयर मदर टंग। वही हम सभी ने भी किया है। All of us have done the same practice while we learned our mother tongue. Their need to communicate is their what we call it. Their need to communicate is the criteria that compels, that pushes them to acquire the language. As experts suggest, there is innate capacity in every human being to acquire language. यह हर किसी में है. All the humans who are born, they have this capacity to acquire language. By the time a child is 5 years old, he has developed his ability to perform all the important functions of language and grammar without having formal training or guidance. Although parents never sit with children to explain to them the working of the language, their utterances show a superb command of intricate rules and patterns that would drive an adult crazy if he or she tries to memorize them and use them accurately. कोई भी बच्चा बड़ी आसानी से फराटे से बोल लेता है मदर टंग। इसके साथ मैं एक और सेकंड टंग को जोड़ना चाहूँगा. लेट अस अज्यूम दैट मोस्ट ऑफ अस हैव मराठी एज आवर मदर टंग and the other tongue, I'm not talking about second language English, but the other tongue that we speak, the regional language, or the media or the entertainment industry's language, that is Hindi. So when a child whose mother tongue is Marathi, he is learning Hindi. How? Because he is exposed to it very often. He is not getting any training. He is not joining any Hindi speaking class, nor any Hindi sider who is living in Maharashtra is required to attend any classes for Marathi speaking. It is just the natural way, without worrying about grammar. They just listen, they repeat, and this is how they learn it. This suggests that it is through exposure to the language and meaningful communication that a language is acquired without the need of systematic studies of any kind. So this is pretty clear. The emphasis on the text of the communication and not on the form. कहना क्या है? Communication is the basis. How and whether it is grammatically accurate or not, that is not the concern. Young students who are in the process of acquiring a second language, they get plenty of on-job practice. They rapidly acquire the language to communicate with classmates. We can see this tendency in which second language teachers are quite aware of the importance of communication in young learners and their inability to memorize the rules consciously. यानी आजकल के जो schools देखते हैं, the kind of schools, kindergartens and the nurseries, in these schools, the students, they have started speaking in English. Why? Without emphasizing the grammar, they have exposed them to the surroundings where they can communicate. It is called as communicative approach, or through listening. The first step, remember in our first slide we had seen the sequence of 4 basic skills of language, L, S, R, W. In that natural sequence of order, listening first, then speaking. If you listen, you will speak. Why to worry about writing and reading it? First listen and keep on repeating it, keep on speaking it. So, but unfortunately, when it comes to adult students, like we, the people in the academics and the job seekers, a quick look at the current methodologies and language courses available clearly shows that communication is set aside, neglected, or even disregarded. In almost all cases, courses on language revolve around grammar, patterns, repetitions, drillings, and rote memorization without even a human interlocutor to interact with. हमेशा लगातार बम्बार्डिंग होती है, ग्रामर 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 सीखो, रूल्स रूल्स रूल्स, दिस इज द रूल, दैट इज द. That's why these traditional ways of learning a language are changing now. I was working in the government engineering college. There was a subject called communicative English. It was an autonomous institute, and we had the freedom to design the curriculum. In the same way, the traditional courses are now gradually opening up for the changes in the education system, particularly in terms of second language acquisition. The courses that promise you language independence and ability to communicate, they do not offer you a single opportunity to engage in conversation. Then how are you supposed to acquire a language? Say, in some other scenarios in which there is a teacher, the work done in the class is mostly grammatically oriented. They focus on grammar, tenses, rules, multiple choice exercises, and so on and so forth. In the similar to the way in which a child acquires a language, is this a way that one can acquire a language? Definitely not. No wonder why so many people fail in acquiring second language naturally, because our schooling has been the other way. It was erred. It was wrong, I would say. Simply because whatever they are doing is highly unnatural and devoid of meaning to them, and they fail to acquire it. So, language learning, as seen today, is not communicative at all. It is the result of direct instructions in the rules of language. So, instead of focusing on rules, the natural way of learning, it says or it asks, it demands that it should be acquired by the natural way, following the sequence of LSRW. Listen first, listen more and more and more, give yourself input, then you can go for speaking and writing and some other skills. A student who has memorized rules of grammar language may not be able to succeed in English language. But when we learn how to differentiate between acquiring rather than learning, so learning, it focuses on deductive teaching method, which is very rule driven. Rules. If you if you commit an error in the rule, you are wrong, you have no right to speak. But on the other hand, acquisition, it is an inductive way of learning. It is not rule driven, but it is rule discovery. It is the bottom up level, from bottom to up, from listening to speaking, then to writing and reading. It goes like this. So this is how language learning and language acquisition differ. We know that listening is the most neglected language ability. Many years, teachers, syllabus designers, they have neglected it because they believe that students' exposure to that language will provide them adequate instruction. They consider it easier than speaking and writing. So their focus traditionally has been on speaking and writing skills rather than on listening skills. So, what are the ways in which we can learn this language acquisition? Let's have a look. Why it is important, again, few points about it, and then we'll move to some of the theories. It is vital for language learning as it provides essential inputs to the learner. That's why it is important to listen more and more. It is necessary for communication since we cannot communicate face to face unless speaking and listening are developed in tandem. एक एग्जाम्पल लेता हूँ, जैसे मैंने भी थोड़ी देर पहले बात की कि हिंदी स्पीकिंग, or if imagine a person who is living in a society where nobody is using English, nobody reads English, nobody talks or listens or watches to English, and he's expected to learn his English capacities. How is it possible? So, in order to learn to speak a language, you must first expose yourself to listening the language. It is significantly different from other three language abilities. How does listening differ? Listening has got great role when it comes to listening and appreciating and understanding it. The speech rate, accents, elisions, the placement of stress, intonation, and so on, they play a great role in your understanding of the messages which are being delivered to you. Now we'll come to some theories, that hallmark theory, or which is called as the natural order theories. I have been talking throughout my slides about the natural way of learning. Adults should acquire a second language just as children do. Remember the way you learnt your mother tongue. Remember the way you learned the second tongue, be it Hindi or be it Marathi. जो लोग हिंदी साइडर हैं उन्होंने मराठी किस तरह से सीखी ज़रा याद कीजिए, और जो मराठी स्पीकिंग नेटिव मराठी स्पीकिंग पीपल हैं वो भी ज़रा याद कर लें कि उन्होंने हिंदी बोलना समझना कैसे सीखा. Thanks to the entertainment industry. They listened and they repeated. That's how the natural theory goes. Picking up a language versus studying a language. So instead of studying, focus should be on picking it up. Observe, pick it up, pick up the clues, pick up the words, phrases, accents, pronunciations. You will pick it up all. Just what you are supposed to do is to expose yourself again, again, and again. And how would you be exposed to the language? By listening more and more and more. We'll come to the other theory, other hypothesis, the acquisition learning hypothesis. What is this acquisition learning hypothesis? It is modeled on Krashen, one of the renowned linguists in the world. In this hypothesis, there are two independent systems of foreign language performance. One is the acquired system and the other is the learned system. अभी acquired system क्या है? The acquired system is acquisition. What is this acquisition? It is the subconscious process very similar to the process children undergo when they acquire their first language. यानी बच्चे जिस तरह से अपनी फर्स्ट लैंग्वेज अपनी मदर टंग सीखते हैं उसी तरह से ये एक्विजिशन हाइपोथेसिस काम करता है. एक्विजिशन यानी आपको वो एक्वायर करनी है and it requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication in which speakers are concentrated not in the form of their utterance but in the communicative act. So focus is not on the form but on the communication, direct application of it. So ये acquisition होती है और ये acquisition कहाँ से आएगी? Listening से ही आएगी, not by reading. It will come out of listening. So see how important listening is in acquiring a second language like English. In contrast to the acquired system, there is a learned system, which we can call as learning of a language, a second language. It involves the formal instruction and it comprises a conscious process which results in conscious knowledge about the language. It is a deductive approach in teacher-centered setting which produces learning. डिडक्टिव है, टीचर है, उसके पास एक ग्रामर की बुक है, वो ग्रामर पढ़ाएगा, रूल्स देगा, टेंस है, ये है, वो है, and it will add to the frustration, the burden on the learners. While an inductive approach, which is a student-centered setting, it leads to acquisition. देखो एक स्टूडेंट सेंट्रिक अप्रोच वो होता है जिसमें स्टूडेंट को अपने तरीके से, अपनी पेस से, अपने पार्टिसिपेटिव परफॉर्मेंस से वो सीखना होता है. सो लैंग्वेज एक्विजिशन एंड लैंग्वेज लर्निंग. I hope the difference is clear between the two concepts. Moving on to the next hypothesis, which is the monitor hypothesis. The monitor hypothesis, what is this monitor hypothesis? It explains the relationship between acquisition and learning, and it also defines the influence of the latter on the former. यानी देखो सीधी सीधी बात, रिलेशन बिटवीन द लैंग्वेज एक्विजिशन एंड लैंग्वेज लर्निंग. इट इज द प्रैक्टिकल रिजल्ट ऑफ लर्निंग. हाउ इट इज द प्रैक्टिकल रिजल्ट ऑफ लर्निंग? द मॉनिटरिंग फंक्शन plays the role gives us the practical results of learned grammar. In learning method, the grammar that we learn is now applied to the acquisition process. यानी पहले आप एक्विजिशन प्रोसेस के थ्रू जाते हो, यू गो थ्रू द एक्विजिशन प्रोसेस, बट at the same time when you are given a formal training in grammar, you apply that, and this application is the practical output. According to this hypothesis, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator. Acquisition में क्या होता है? It initiates utterances. It starts, it initiates, it gives you input, enough input to make you speak, while the learning system performs the role of the monitor or editor. Means you go on speaking and with the use of grammar you test whether you are right or wrong. More or less we can call this monitoring hypothesis as the error recognition process. And in this process there are some people, जैसे अलग अलग तरह के लोग होते हैं. आपने देखा हो कि ग्रामर फैनेटिक, बहुत ज़्यादा हमेशा ग्रामर 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 करने वाले, या जो कीड़े होते हैं ग्रामर के, दे आर quite obsessed with the idea of grammar. And these people, we can call them as the overusers of this monitoring. uh, they are like all the time looking for errors in the people or in themselves, and this adds to a lot of frustration and pressure on the language learners. There are some underusers. There are learners who have not learned, or who prefer not to use their conscious knowledge of grammar for speaking. They are termed or called as underusers. Then there are the optimal users, those learners that use the monitor appropriately, means properly, neither too much not too less. Whenever it is required, when they feel like okay, maybe I'm wrong, so they will go and test it with the reference books, text, or with someone, and they will optimize it. So ये क्यों ऐसे होता है? Why there are such users, over users, under users, and optimal users? It's because of the person's psychological profile. uh, if you look at the person from a psychological point of view, it will help you determine the people belonging to this group. Usually, extroverts are the underusers, while the introverts and the perfectionists are the overusers. आप इर्द गिर्द देख लो, जो परफेक्शनिस्ट है ना, वो हमेशा ग्रामर पे फोकस करते हुए नजर आएंगे. वो हमेशा गलतियां निकालेंगे, वो हमेशा पिन करेंगे कि ये नो, दिस इज रॉन्ग, यू आर स्पीकिंग रॉन्ग, दैट वे, दैट चॉइस ऑफ वर्ड, दैट प्रोनाउंसिएशन इज रॉन्ग, एंड सो ऑन. So this is about the perfectionists. The lack of self-confidence is frequently related to the overuse of monitor sometimes. Moving on to the next hypothesis, which is the input hypothesis. The input hypothesis, it attempts to show or explain how the learner acquires a second language, or how the second language acquisition takes place, how it naturally goes on, how it rather should happen, and how it actually happens. It is concerned with acquisition and not learning, similar to the first hypothesis that we talked about, acquisition versus learning. But in this, there is a conscious focus on putting in or giving in some input. It is called as what you can call the comprehensible input. If a learner is at a certain stage, then he must be provided input which is +1 level than his current position. यानी मान लो आपकी एक level है, जैसे basic level है, so you should be given an input which is at least intermediate level. So gradually you should be leveling up. So this is what comprehensible input is about. You giving the input which is slightly higher or slightly tougher than the current level at which you are. In this input method, natural communicative input is the key to designing a syllabus for actually language acquisition. You will have to ensure that learner gets the proper input. As language teachers, you must understand the needs of the student, what level is he at, and then accordingly provide him with the inputs, be it audio visuals, be it some speeches, be it the reading material, whatever it is. But most importantly, the listening habit, it should be leveled up by providing him a comprehensible input. Then the next hypothesis is the affective filter hypothesis. What is this affective filter? Affective filter क्या होता है? ये affective filter क्या आता है? It's like a non-casual approach in second language acquisition. It involves motivation, self-confidence, anxiety and personality traits. देखो यहाँ पे एक जो पिक्चर मैंने दिखा रखी है, in this picture you can see that the earlier version, in the earlier slide we have seen that leveling up, whatever stage you are at, +1. So that is comprehensible input. But when we are putting in the comprehensible input, there are certain barriers, affective filters. There are some filters which affect your acquisition. What are those filtering factors? The fear of language, the fear of people, the fear of committing errors in grammar, fear of anger of the teacher, whatever, the boredom, nervousness, and so on. So, low motivation, low self-esteem, anxiety, etc. They play a role of mental blocks which prevent proper language acquisition. So we will have to revert this effect by encouraging students, by motivating them to speak, by making our content interesting. So this is what effective filter hypothesis is about. Now coming to the last hypothesis, that is the natural order hypothesis, which I guess I have already talked enough about. It focuses on acquiring rules in predictable order. ग्रामर का एक सीक्वेंस होता है, उस सीक्वेंस में नेचुरल ऑर्डर में वो जाता रहना चाहिए, इंडिपेंडेंट फ्रॉम orders that are taught in language class. It doesn't worry about the way we are taught, but it rather focuses on acquisition of grammar structure with the practice. It points out the implication of natural order, that a language program syllabus should be based on the order found in the studies. The person, the linguist, he has rejected this grammatical sequencing. There is no need of grammatical sequencing कि पहले ये ही आना चाहिए, पहले ग्रामर का सेंटेंस स्ट्रक्चरिंग ही तुम्हें परफेक्ट आना चाहिए, फिर जाकर ही आप लैंग्वेज सीख सकते हो. नहीं, ऐसी कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. लेट हिम स्पीक, लेट द लर्नर स्पीक, लेट द लर्नर लिसन, एंड लेट हिम गो ऑन. So we have now come to the end of this slightly lengthier section, which talked about listening. So to sum up, we can say that listening is very important skill. Forget about reading, forget about writing. No doubt speaking is required, equally important, and other skills are also important, but listening is the most important skill, though it is neglected. There are various theories that emphasize listening. We have seen various theories in which the natural way of learning a language is by listening and repeating it. It's just a natural way. And finally, I will have one advice for all those who are willing to learn English or develop English. Don't worry too much about grammar. You can monitor it later. Thank you so much.